Okay, welcome back. This is Chapter 8. Chapter 8 is another one of those philosophical kinds of chapters like Chapter 6 was. It's all about the second look at classes on page 493. So the first thing you talk about is static class members. Now we talked about this briefly because out of necessity we had to talk about something being static. So you know the effect of something being static is that I can get to it without having an instance. So I put the thing that's static in the recipe rather than in the chocolate chip cookies. Okay, that's the effect of making something static. But we're going to go a little bit further and explain why and how you'd want to do that. So static methods, I'm doing slightly out of order in the book on page 497. So static method means I can talk to a method without having an instance, right? We already talked about that. But there's a problem with that. And that is a static method can't talk to the data inside the class. Now let me show you what I'm talking about using Chapter 7 rectangle. Okay, so here's our rectangle class. And we have some data, don't we? We've got something like, length and width, right? We've got this data here. So if you scroll down here, we do have a couple of things here. These guys right here, this calc area guys, okay? These three guys here do not store any data or do not use any stored data. In other words, you provide the data on the command line, so to speak, and it just does its thing. So these three guys could have been marked static and do not need an instance of the class. Now, I can't do that up here. Right? If I was to try to make this static, it'd turn right around and say, whoa, whoa, whoa. What are you doing talking to PFV length? PFV length's not static. Okay. Do you kind of sort of follow what I'm saying? If a method uses data, it cannot be static. If a method doesn't use any stored data in the class, well, then you could, if you wanted to, mark it as static. Cool? Okay. The effect is the same. Those that are marked static, you can get to without having a class instance. Okay, good. So, we added 3 items onto a rectangle, which did not require, it does not use any stored data in this class. I'm not using PFV length or anything like that. Got it? Okay, good. So, really, well, what does that do for me? I mean, if I was just to go here and make this public static double, whoopee, I made it static, but, what does that do, right? Well, the thing is that in some cases, it makes sense to make things static. In this particular case, I could make it static, but quite frankly, I probably wouldn't. Okay? A better example of this is if I use the math class. Okay? So if I go here and I say, well, actually, let me just put one inside here someplace. So what, well, not after the return statement, that would be dumb. Okay, so here I do something about, I want to say, I don't know, double D is equal to math dot, okay? Now, every single thing in here is static. See the little bar? They have static over the constants, and they have static for over every single one of these methods. Every single one of them. In fact, there are no non-static methods here. So if I wanted, I don't know, the absolute value of this, then, that's what I would do. I would say absolute value of length or whatever. Now in this particular case, it kind of made sense because all of the items were static. Now, yes, you can have a class where half of them are static and half of them are not. That's pretty rare. What makes sense is, in like the math class is a built-in class for Java that every single thing in there, all the constants and all the methods are static. Now, the math class doesn't store any data whatsoever, so it's easy for it to do that, okay? Now let's talk about some rules. Okay, you perked up, haven't you? And you grabbed your pencil and paper? Okay. A static method can't use any non-static field method, right? Like it can't go and grab a PFV, okay? Make sense? And then a static method can't call a non-static method. Okay, let me just let that sink in a minute. A static method can't call a non-static method. Okay, now, I'm going to go back here to Chapter 7, guy. Remember how at the beginning we always have our main as static, and then everything else that shows up inside here, if we have a method inside here, these are all static. Remember all that? Okay, now you understand why. We've always just made all these things static without actually talking about them. But one of the rules is a static method like main, because it itself is static, it can only talk to other static things. It can't talk to a non-static thing because that might change, right? Static things don't change. That's why it's kind of called static. So that makes kind of a little bit of a sense. So I can't go in here and create me an alternate one of these guys. I can't say int sum 32, int array like this. Okay, and then do something. In fact, why don't I just copy this to show you what I'm talking about? Okay, so far so good. The machine does not complain whatsoever. I mean, in fact, if I compile this guy, it's going to say, okay, I don't see anything wrong with that. Cool. Now, from inside main, okay, let's go try this guy out. So here's where we have Summit. And I'm just going to do another one of these guys. In fact, I'm just going to copy and paste. And change this one to sum 32. And it's going to come back with a little thing saying, hey, a non-static method cannot be referenced from a static context. Okay. Whew. All right. So those are the rules. One rule is you can't talk to any non-static field, and you can't call a non-static method from a static method. All right. So rule number 2 is the reason why everything inside the Chapter 7 guy has to be static. All the methods that we created have to be static. Otherwise, it won't work. Okay. Now, on page 494, they talk about static fields. Now, the effect is the same. The effect being I can get to this field without having to have an instance. But the way you use it is slightly different. So I'm going to create me a brand new project. In fact, well, that's all right. So I'm going to do a new project, and this is going to be Chapter 8, as usual. Okay, so here we are with Chapter 8, and what I want to do is I want to create an employee class. Cool. All right, so let's go here, and I want a new Java class. We're going to call it employee. Okay, just to make things go a little faster, I'm not going to have an awful lot of stuff in here. So I'm just going to do a private, that is not how you spell private, private string PFV first name. And then I'm going to need a getter and a setter. You know how this works. So not that. So inside here, now wait a minute now. Inside here, this is not there's no static inside here, right? So I don't have to use static inside my class. Okay, good. All right. So I need to have a public way to set the guy, right? So set first name, with some sort of a string first name like that. Cool. And then we're going to need a getter. So public string get first name like this. Okay, you guys have seen all this before. All I'm doing is just making this stuff. And for right now, I'm not going to worry about any type of input validation. I'm just going to assume that they're right, and I'll come back and fix that later. So this is just going to be PFV first name is equal to first name. And here is just going to be return PFV first name. Okay, so far we haven't done anything dealing with static yet. But let's say that every time you create an employee, I want to have like an employee number. And the employee number I want to like auto increment. So like the first guy through is going to be 1, and the second guy through is going to be 2, and then 3, and then 4. Like that? Kind of makes sense? So I'm going to build me a constructor, right? Well, actually not. I'm going to go up here and create me a static element here, okay? So it's still going to be private. Static integer ID. And I'm going to go ahead and set its initial value because it's static. All right, now this is a value that's going to be shared among all instances. So if I have 100 employees, everyone gets to see this variable, and they all share the same value. Okay, good. So here's what I'm going to do for my constructor. I'm going to create me a private integer PFV imp ID. Okay, so everyone gets an employee ID. And then when I get down here to my constructor, remember how the constructor is just going to be the name of the class, right, with no return type? So public employee. So, cool. This is the default constructor, no big deal. And here, what I'm going to say is PFV imp ID is equal to ID. Okay. See what I've done here? Now, every time someone comes in here, let me go ahead and do a... now, this is going to be a read-only property. That means there's not going to be a way to set this, but you could have a getter. So let's do that. So public int get imp ID. And then, well, we'll just return PFV imp ID. Right? So this guy is not one of those things that has both a getter and a setter, because the only way you can set it is by creating a new employee. Cool? All right. Let's go back here and let's try one. All right. So I'm going to go here and say, I don't know, employee imp1 is equal to new employee. Dang. And then I'll do an employee imp2 is equal to new employee. All right. And then I want to see what their IDs are. So I'm just going to say system.out print ln imp1's ID is and then imp1 dot get imp ID. Cool. And then I'm going to do the second one just to make sure it worked. So in theory, now that these guys have shared the same variable, this should come out the way I expect. All right, so imp2 and imp2, and let's give this guy a whirl. Okay, that's taking a little longer than normal. Yay, it worked. Okay, this is a good place to stop for the 15-minute mark.